Chairman, I think on this particular application I'll probably receive more of an objection pretty well the whole of Brook Avenue on this particular site. And before I go into sort of a bit more detail, I think it might be useful just to sort of talk about where we are in that respect. So before the application was received, the developer in early spring decided to completely clear the whole site all over one weekend. This included getting rid of, as we've heard before, quite a number of very mature oak trees, etc., which in my mind almost equates to wanton vandalism. I mean, when you looked at that site before and looked at it now, it's actually disgusting. He also burned all the spoil on site, causing problems for his neighbours with smoke, etc. It's also interesting to note that the applicant's planning, design and access statement on the front page shows the site in all its glory with the numerous trees still intact. Interestingly, page 4 of the statement under trees says, and I quote, "No trees will be harmed as a result of this proposal." Then at the same time of the clearance, Japanese knotweed was found on site, which I'm sure that the diggers, etc., have probably spread the spores around the site. Even more interestingly today, on the very day of the planning committee, the applicant seems to have his diggers on site spreading earth. I would therefore ask officers in that respect, is this contrary to the site management plan that we keep talking about in the report? So these two items mentioned shows really a total disregard to both the council and to the neighbours. So moving on to the points raised in the deputations, I would agree that the 2001 proposal referred to, which was not objected to, was in a much smaller width. And we keep talking about width in terms of the main bulk, but I don't think you can just look at it in, it's only 21.7. It is actually 35 because you've got the two-storey extensions on the end of it as well. I will also agree that the current proposal is unacceptable due to its size, bulk and width, and sits too close to the boundaries. Also, the proposed garage, in my mind, does not help the application by virtue of its position and height. We then talk about the size of the property, 10,000 square feet against the 5,700. And I think the other important thing to note on that is that if we look at Strawberry Fields or Bywater House, they go down, I think as previously mentioned, much further down, so they're not so prominent in that respect. Also, then moving on to the views from Bunny's Meadows, I think it's important as a member of the River Handle Management Committee, the views from the Handle are very important. At present, we look at a completely open site, and as such, a proposal would have no dominant feature and have an adverse impact on the landscape, and therefore I believe contravenes policy CS14. I also have a copy of the report from the senior ecologist from Hampshire County Council, all 9 pages of it, which makes very interesting reading. It states on page 4 that, as the objector states, and quotes, noise, percussive piling, destruction, work or demolition does cover condition 13. On that particular one, I notice on our conditions, in condition 13, it only talks about percussive piling. It doesn't talk about demolition. So I guess the question on that is that demolition makes a noise. Therefore, I think it's stated by the objectors that means the property will not be able to be demolished until the 1st of April next year. Whether that's right or not, I don't know, but it seems to make sense. And also, I think the ecology report brings out quite a number of other points that are equally important. I think also the point made by the objector about the swimming pool regarding permitted development rights and possibly a third floor situation being put in the main building, we ought to look at to see if that can be stopped under the permitted development rights. I think the other important thing to mention also is that we should be aware that the application is adjacent to European designated sites and SSSIs, which will be treated as such. So I think my view in conclusion, Chairman, is that I believe the application is contrary to policy CS14 by virtue of its size, height, bulk and width, and also policy DSPs also covers the other areas as well. I believe the application should be rejected and I will be voting accordingly. Thank you, Chairman.
Richard, can you clarify the case of demolition as opposed to possible piling or whatever?
Chairman, more than happy to. If I could ask members to look at condition 13 within the report. Sorry, before I do that, it's important to point out there is an update to the report which includes a number of suggested amendments to those conditions. It doesn't suggest an amendment to condition 13 though, which is the one I was going to talk about. Condition 13 is specifically to do with avoiding disturbance to overwintering birds on the protected River Hamble. So it looks to avoid any kind of works that create a lot of noise. And so although it refers to percussive piling particularly, it says no percussive piling or works with heavy machinery to be undertaken during the bird overwintering period. It clarifies what is meant by works with heavy machinery. So plant resulting in a noise level in excess of 69 decibels. Now, whilst that doesn't rule out the possibility that the dwelling can still be demolished and still there be compliance with that condition during that period of October to March, it might be quite difficult to do so, bearing in mind demolition involves the use of heavy machinery unless you're going about it in a specific way. So, I mean, the condition effectively says, unless otherwise agreed in writing with the local planning authority. If the applicant, for example, was to suggest that they could demolish the building without breaching that condition or without exceeding that decibel level, then quite possible demolition could take place during that period. But in all honesty, it's more likely to be April that would be the first opportunity for demolition to take place. Does that help clarify it? I'm sorry, I've spoken a lot about that.
I think yes, that is a bit more helpful actually. What my worry to a certain extent is that we talk about 60 decibels, etc. How we actually will be able to enforce that. It strikes me it would be impossible to do so. So I think perhaps saying it can't happen until the 1st of April might be a bit more acceptable. That's if the accusation is accepted, of course.
Thank you, Chairman. There's not a great deal to add to what Councillor Cartwright said, but could have confirmation just on 2 points. One is that from the deputies we heard different figures on the width. Could we have confirmed exactly what they are by comparison with the 2000 approved scheme? And the second point I'd like to ask is that we had plenty of photographs of various aspects, but we haven't actually got one from, say, the footpath by the Hamble of what the proposed building would be like, the shape of it there. That's about the only thing we have missing, which I think that is an important perspective, an important view.
Are you looking for the bulk width?
The bulk
or the total width?
Well, the total width, I think, during the deputations we had different figures mentioned, and I'd just like to know how much wider or narrower is it from the approval in?
Is that including the other buildings that are at a lower level, or are you just talking about the
From
main?
the one, from
That's still 2 storage.
That one?
from the,
That one?
yes, yeah, the perspective that we will see from the footpath, I was going to say the towpath, but the footpath, which is the most important view with regard to what the local population will see.
Can you do that, Richard? I think with Councillor Baker's comment, he wants the total width of all the buildings, including their other elements, rather than just the red masses.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt again, but I think that's slightly deceptive, and it shows the main bulk of the building, the 2 bits on either end. Remember, that's a double story as well. Not a single story, it's a double story as well. So my view is we should be looking full width, including those, not just a red bit shown.
Are any other elements of the other buildings two-storey or are they single-storey? Let's get that bit clarified.
Chairman, I don't believe so, no. Let me just before I show you that then, let's go back to the rear elevation and explain what we're seeing here, what was proposed, sorry. Excuse me. So the central part of the dwelling here is two-storey in scale. And then either side you have a wing with an interconnecting part of roof. So that effectively there's first floor accommodation there within the roof space. So there are two stories. The shape of the roof has a single story eaves height back. So in terms of bulk and massing, it is less so than it would be if it had a two-story eaves height. Now, so now I've explained that, I can't say that either of the figures that you've heard quoted about the overall width of the house are wrong, because they're both right. They're both talking about different dimensions. So let me go on to the drawing and explain. So the overall width that was referred to as 35 metres. I think reference was made to the entire width of the structure, entire width of the dwelling. The reference that was made to 20.8 is the width of the central part with the two-storey eaves heights. And so I hope that clarifies that why there's two different, seemingly contrasting views as to how wide the house is. I think they're both right, they're just talking about different dimensions.
Richard, go to Hamble's Edge. What are those wings that are off the main building on there? What height are they?
This is a single-storey wing here. It's a swimming pool with you can probably see as a pitched roof with a flat roof element in the centre of it, and then the two-storey part of the house is centrally within the plot. And that's, if I just go along to it, that was the idea of providing this drawing. Although I'm fearful that it might not be as helpful to members as we were hoping, because this drawing, the intention was to shade the central bulk of each of the dwellings in red to demonstrate that bulk is, with all of these dwellings, located centrally within the plot, and that's the same with the proposal. But yes, there are wings outside of that central bulk with the proposal of Drift House.
And they're higher than the wings of the other buildings?
I would say that they will certainly are, yes.
Right. Councillor Ford?
Thank you, Chairman. A moment again through you, if I could just ask Richard for a couple of clarifications, and then I'll come back to the main bulk when the members have had a say. Looking again at the bulk, and particularly the views from the Hamble, it looks to me like Drift House currently, the ridge height is higher than the adjoining properties, and I believe the ridge height of the replacement will be marginally higher than that. Looking at Hamble's Edge, when we saw the picture of Hamble's Edge, it seemed to be raised slightly higher than Hamble's Edge. So I wonder if we have any dimensions to show how much the ridge height on the proposed house here will extend beyond its neighbours. And that's not necessarily the height from the ground, obviously, because it looks, again, as I say, against Hamble's Edge, that this is slightly elevated. And that comes down to the prominence in the bulk.
Chairman, we looked at a number of bits of information on this. Let me start off with the drawing, the street scene drawing provided by the architect, provided by the applicant, which we've looked at. It appears to be, as far as we can tell, this appears to be accurate, and it clearly shows the Hamble's Edge on the left and Fenmead on the right. The overall ridge heights, if not the eaves height of Fenmead, but the overall ridge height is lower than both the existing house on the site and the proposed. Now, the proposed ridge at its very highest, this point where my cursor is at the moment, is 0.5 of a metre higher than the existing ridge height, half a metre higher. So that's the first bit of information that we have. The other bit of information we have to gauge, how high things are, is planning history, and we've gone through the planning history of adjacent properties. Now, those dimensions I think are only so good as the ground level that they're measured from. And as I've already mentioned, the site slopes away from east to west, so depending on where you're measuring the height of Drift House, the proposal from, it varies. Because if you measure it from the front, it's not as high as if you measure it from the back. And we've got that same problem when we're comparing that with the adjacent houses. But what we're seeing is that the adjacent houses typically are slightly lower in terms of their overall ridge height. What I would say though, with probably the most important gauge to, because ultimately members are looking at this and you're asking yourself the question whether this house is too big and too high to sit comfortably with the houses that are alongside it. Ultimately, the most useful bit of information that you've got, the photographs that I've shown you, and that's deliberately, we've deliberately shown you a lot of photographs to try and give you as much information as possible to be able to make that judgment. It's useful to bear in mind when you're looking at those photos what I've said about the existing height of the house. So when you're seeing the existing house in those photographs, that the overall height of the proposed dwelling would be marginally higher, 0.5 of a metre higher at its highest point. The height on either side of that being no higher than existing at the moment. So hopefully that gives you these visual markers that you need to, in order to picture what this would look like. Does that help?
May I just ask for one more bit of information, Richard? Thank you, Chairman. We've heard talk about this, I think about 10,000 odd square feet against other properties, the largest of the one 5,000 odd square feet. Is that, again, talking about the bulk of it, is that accurate?
Chairman, I'm afraid I don't have information about the size of the properties in the street to be able to comment on that, on that figure. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry about this. I just think on that point, the owner of Bywater House has made the point that her property is 5,700 square feet. So we've got that. That's in one of the objection letters. The advert for this particular application says it's 10,000 square feet. So I think we have got that information.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very unfortunate that in terms of the pre-clearance of this site and where it is undertaken, particularly unfortunate because of the Japanese knotweed that's on site. In fact, Japanese knotweed is quite prevalent in the area generally, and we do know there are very strict regulations in terms of how you can treat it and what you can take off site and what you can't. The fact that both of those were done, I think, is very unfortunate, and probably does make one wonder about the degree of concern that the owner or the developer actually has for their neighbours. But having a concern is not actually reason for refusal. Although, given the whole range of conditions we've got listed against were we to give approval, you might well wonder whether those conditions will be adhered to without some very strong enforcement. But once again, is not a reason to refuse. There may well be much greater square metre floor space, but in practice what we're looking at here is the visual nature of what's been proposed relative to the surrounding area, and I would judge that this property, although large, and if you're on the larger end of the properties down the road, there are other properties that would be visually also as imposing as this one. The topography is such that anyone walking along Brook Lane, of course, only sees part of the property anyway, and I think that does make a big difference. In terms of the views from the handball, well, you're probably talking of 70 to 80 metres from Bundy's Meadow and another 20 metre plus from any craft travelling down the river. The site itself is quite bereft of of trees, so it will be obvious, more obvious than some of the other properties down there. That may be something that could also be part of the condition. And I do notice that treatment is one of the conditions that we've got down there. But I think that the vision from the Hamble River itself would not be such that you would object to the property replacing the one that's already there. The conditions do touch matters of ecology, boundary treatment. We have no objection from any statutory authority, which is a telling point. So I think the officer's overall considerations that this development should receive permission is probably correct, and I will go along with that recommendation. But I am concerned that the range of conditions we've got might need to be enforced.
Councillor Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I certainly don't like the size of the building. I think it's too big. I think CS 14 clearly matches the reason for a refusal. The other thing which I have great concerns about is that the clearance of the site, which by the owner stroke developer, as the Councillor Cartwright said, and the burning of material on site, it just seems to me that this is a prevalence in fair and now that some unscrupulous developers seem to want to do that. And that's wrong. So therefore, on that basis, is that although their building should not be demolished between October and April, then what is to stop the person going in and doing that over a weekend when there's going to be nobody about again to actually check and to do anything about it? And I think this is the worry that I have, is that this sort of developer has not shown good grace to me in what he has done so far. So I believe that the building is too bulky. You have to take into consideration the two wings to show the true development. You can't just take in isolation the centre bit and say that is 21.7 metres and ignore the other 13.3 metres, which are the two wings added together. So to me it is too bulky. If it had been the centre part, then yes, that would probably be acceptable as a replacement. But with the two side wings, it is totally too big, out of character, and from my point of view should be refused.
Councillor Davis?
Yes, I think most of the points have been made, but if I could just make two other points. In terms of the car parking at the front, one of the objectors asks, is this of permeable material? Because there's an awful lot of hard surface there. I mean, if those two cars are to scale, we're talking about a huge area of some kind of hard surface. So that's one issue. The second issue is the garage with the living rooms above. Now, presumably, they cannot be used for business purposes, and they can't be used as a separate accommodation, I presume. And the third point about the raised terrace, which again is more hard surfacing. You probably did explain, Richard, but my mind wandered. The thing that's sticking out, that's decking, is it?
Chairman, let me just make sure that I'm clear on what Councillor Davis is referring to. You mean this area here, the white area?
Yeah, and beyond that, the slope going down.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. I can have a look at the plans that I've got here with me.
It might be useful to know because it's quite a large thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, going back to the car parking area, that must be massive. 2 cars take that amount of space.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm really not surprised that the neighbours here are not happy with this. because the slash and burn attitude of the current owner stroke developer, and I understand doing it on a Friday afternoon when little could be done about it, is just pure cynicism. And so I'm hardly surprised that they're angry, let alone the nature of the property. But yeah, looking at CS14, the conversion of existing buildings will be favoured. Replacement buildings must reduce the impact of development, then it goes on, and so whatever else must reduce the impact of development. Particularly in coastal locations, development should not have an adverse impact on the special character when viewed from land or water. I'm a regular walker along the footpath there, as I am a user of the Pink Ferry across the Hamble, but I've taken a walk along there this week and a zip across the ferry as well, just to view it, as I know Richard has done. And whilst walking along the footpath, it is probably fair to say that as you reach the front of each one, it is somewhat, the properties are somewhat screened by the trees. But as you move further back, of course, you see a wider vista. And certainly from the middle of the river, it's quite stark. And I think this, even ignoring the fact that the trees have been lopped down either side of it, it is quite stark. And looking at something that is going to be significantly more prominent than this, with a ridge height that's 1/2 metre higher than this, and it would appear higher than the neighbouring properties, stretching over 20 metres, although we accept it drops for the remaining bit, just seems to me too bulky. And certainly when looking at it from the river, I don't see a great impact looking at it from Brook Avenue, because you've got to look through gates and over hedges and such, but looking at it particularly from the water, it does seem to me to be just far too bulky. So it seems to me the ridge height wants dropping and the bulk wants reducing.
I'm a walk on the path as well, and I'd agree that CS14 is challenged by this bulk of proposal. It is the wings and the fact that there's a eave to the house on either side, combined with the position of the property on top of this plinth, which is very visible to us in the pictures we were given by the Film Society. The house is on some kind of platform which elevates it, and if we add the weight, the width to the height, and the view from the path is something which has been a detrimental move if we allow this to happen on this particular scale. I also have a question really about the precedence that's set. If this property is developed to this scale, then presumably in the future the neighbouring properties have a good chance of also being redeveloped to this scale. And I think that the whole group of houses then would have potentially in future a big impact on the amenity of the local area. The treatment of the materials to the rear of the property, the Seadrift house stands out quite prominently visually because of its cream or white coloured treatment. So we would also perhaps look at treatment for this property just to ensure that there's no proposal to treat this in a colour which doesn't particularly blend in with the surrounds. But I would vote against this proposal on the grounds of bulk and CS14 being compromised.
I think we've got to be careful when we're looking at relativity here. It's regrettable that the site's been cleared. But I don't think we ought to use on some punitive measure. So because the site has been cleared, the intentions of are not as honourable as they may be. What might not do in the future. To reduce the ridge height of this property by 1/2 metre from the distances that we're talking about would be almost imperceptible, I would say. If you look at the other properties as well, the majority of those, although they're different configuration, the majority of those properties are developed boundary to boundary on either side of them by outbuildings of some description. We're not sure what they are, but they're certainly there. The thing that makes this one different for the two buildings on either side is they have pitch roofs. That's the difference. So I think we've got to be extremely careful saying it's 1/2 metre too high or it's a couple of metres too wide and the site's been cleared as it shouldn't be. I don't think the dimensions that we're referring to here, from the distances we talk about, we're going to have a great deal of difference. Therefore, I think it should be approved.
Yeah, just briefly, Chairman. Chairman. My colleague, Councillor Evans, has mentioned about none of the other agencies have commented adversely, but on page 15, on page 15, ecology, there's two paragraphs there of things that have to be carefully checked. And with the evidence that we've had already of trees being pulled down and other things undertaken without any approval, how, apart from having a planning officer on site all the time, how are we meant to check this?
Richard, can you clarify something for me? Clearing a site prior to planning, either approval or whatever, does that require anything I'm not aware of? Are there any TPO trees that have been cleared from this site? Is it in fact, and perhaps this is more for Alex, is it legal to go in and clear your own site without any requirements whatsoever?
Let me put it like this, you don't need planning permission to do what the applicant has done in this instance, which is clear the site of vegetation and trees. The trees that were on the site were not subject to the tree preservation order, so they didn't receive that protection. The applicant was not obliged to seek consent of the council to fell those trees before he did so. What has happened on the site, there's no breach in respect of planning control. It's not something that they ought to have obtained planning permission for prior to doing it. It's now a good opportunity for me to come back on a couple of the questions that I think Councillor Davies asked. Apologies, I didn't answer them. The first question was, is the driveway permeable? The answer is yes, it's marked on the drawings to be permeable block pavers. The second question was, could the first floor accommodation in the garage be used for business purposes or as ancillary accommodation? The answer is, well, yes, provided there's not a material change of use of the property, which would itself require planning permission. So I think members will be familiar with previous cases where businesses have been operated from home, and the point eventually being reached in some cases where there's been a material change of use of those properties. The third question was about the terrace, let me be more precise, this area here that I'm pointing at with my cursor. There's nothing marked on the drawing to denote what kind of materials that is, but I would suspect it's some sorts of block pavers, or it may be decking, but we don't have any details of it being a raised terrace or raised decking, for example.
It's just a feature.
I believe it's just a garden feature, a garden pathway in an area, a hard surfaced area within the garden, as opposed to being soft landscaping with grass.
I mean, from my full pennyworth and the years of experience, this is a very large house, but so are the surrounding houses. They are equally as large, if not in volume, they're certainly in width and various scalings of parts of the dwellings. I don't personally have, I tend to go along with Councillor Evans and Councillor Landry on this. I don't think it's so overwhelming that it's a question of refusal. It's just, to me, it's just a large house in a large plot, a bit sensitive. We're getting caught up with the business of what's happened to the site rather than what this proposal is. And on that basis, I would support the officer's recommendation. But anyway,
I just want to propose that
Right.
we propose that this application is rejected.
do you have a second one? That's a four. Yeah, round six.
CFC.
Okay, alone.
Can I just check, because I know I've just been picking up and making notes as the discussion's gone through. So the ones that got mentioned were CS14, DSP 6, and if members don't mind me mentioning it, CS17 deals with high quality design. And I like the comments that have been made by yourself, Councillor. That was part of it.
Questioning the quality of the design? Would you say that's not a very high quality of design?
Well, sorry, Chairman, I mean CS17, sorry, I've got the benefit of it in front of me at the moment, so I was just taking a look at it, and that some of the comments being made by members. Part of it, for example, requires development to respond positively to and be respectful of the key characteristics of the area, including, for example, landscape, scale, form, spaciousness. And it was that part that, from the discussion that been made by some members, Chairman, seemed to be relevant.
Okay. Keep with CS17? Right. You've got your seconder. Those in favour of refusal? And those against? 3. That's refused.